Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be going over some really useful tips to make and edit some bass sounds, so that way you could have better mixed tunes with basses that really hit and sound nice. Now there's a couple of really good examples in this track that I've just gone ahead and started today and put together, and we're going to be breaking down a bit of the main lead bass sound, some techniques that went into making it, some mixing decisions, stuff like that. Now, I do have this interesting sort of filtered version of it that's super low quality with some effects on it, but it's like low quality on purpose. By that I mean like I have some guitar amps to kind of get rid of those highs. Sounds like this. But like to kind of show you what that turns into, this is the main bass synth over here. So it's like a very aggressive drum and bass sort of dance floor lead. And this is something that goes more in the background as well, because we do also have a lead sound. That's something super important to this that I do want to talk about, how this goes with the lead. But before I go into any techniques whatsoever, I think it's important that you get the context of this track. So I'm just going to play this little section of what's going to be the build-up, and then a small portion of the drop, so you get a feel for where exactly this is sitting. So right now it sounds like this. So you get a feel for what that sounds like now. And you see, this is what I was talking about, how this is kind of fitting with our lead sound. The bass sound and the lead are both very frontal, but they had to fit together. And that is actually our first point before we even get into sound design. Pay attention to how your bass is sitting with the rest of the elements in your mix. Something I actually had to do to this bass line, and I could show you this if I do play this with the drums as well. Right now, it sounds like this. So on its own, you won't actually notice this, but I've actually done a technique to push that super far into the background because the lead is also playing over top it. If we open up this instance of an EQ, you see I'm leaving all of the sub and very low mids basically fully intact, but I'm doing a pretty intense cut here. You see we're doing like 4.5 decibels, cutting basically all of the mids and highs, because this is where that lead is really sitting. And if we take this off, say for example this track was different, if this didn't have a lead and I just wanted this bass sound to basically be the drop, we take it off and it sounds like this. So now that's our main element, but if we put this back on, you see how much further in the back it is now, and that was to carve space for this sound. Because that's running very hot and it's a very full sound, it's filling up all of that space. And we couldn't leave the bass how it was, because I'll actually show you if we take off just that so you could really hear it. If we take off that EQ, listen to how much the bass and the lead are conflicting. Versus this. See, that second one is just a lot easier to listen to than the first. You can also take this a step further. I didn't do it in this track, but I have a really interesting video talking about this technique. You can use Soothe to sidechain out one of those instances from the other. So you could actually basically carve out the frequencies of the lead from the bass patch to really make it fit in. That is a super useful mixing tip. And I've also used Soothe just in a regular instance here. Super important to getting rid of any harsh frequencies. We're going to talk more about the sound design aspects first, because I think that's probably the thing most people are clicking on this video for, so I do sort of want to get to it quickly. But after that, we're going to go back into the mixer here and talk more about some of the mixing decisions I made after we did the initial sound design. So if I take off every single effect, right now the bass sound sounds like this. So that is literally just our bass patch with nothing additional. Obviously there are effects in Vital, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about first. But starting things off, how I made this sound. So I started with oscillator A, and again, sound design, yes you can teach it to a degree, but so much of it is just experimenting. That's exactly what I did. I opened up the list of wavetables, and just kept cycling through them until I found one that had a good movement, meaning like I'm using this to control like where things are, changing the frames, things like that, and then making this shape with LFO so it's like rotating over time. That was my mindset here. I drew this shape and I just wanted it to sound good, and I messed with different effects. I have a high pass because I didn't actually want any sub in this instance because I'm using a dedicated one below. But it sounds like this. This is just trial and error. I got something that sounded like this, but you could see this LFO completely affects like the movement of that. Like if I did this. And you know what? That's a cool variation. You could have it play the first way, like the first repetition, then have it do this the second time. There's just so many different ways you can make this sound cool. That's really nice. So this was mainly just experimenting. You see, I've dragged that to several things. I have it like over here to shift this. You could have it mess with this a little bit as well if you wanted. The possibilities are completely endless, and that was just one instance. Following that, I have a dedicated sub just because I didn't want my sub to be unbalanced. So you see, I take that off. This is all that's there. And then, another really useful sound design tip is adding a layer like this, if we just play it on its own. Give yourself a nice fifth. This will play a very crucial part because it's a different note, but it harmonizes with it all the way through, consistently, all the time. It's actually an octave up as well, so you see that's why this is up 19. But if we play this with oscillator A, you could hear that because it exists in a different region and it just supports it nicely. That's one of my favorite techniques for making a bass sound. It also makes it, you know, it just gives you something new to listen to in that, so it's easier to identify in the context of a full mix. Listening to that together now. In this track specifically, I didn't want to overload the high end too much, and I thought at this instance it was. So that's sort of where I went into, you know, my effects are currently off, but I definitely rolled off a lot above 10K. Again, we're going to get into that a little more later. But looking at the effects, some things I did to this as well. We do have chorus. This one's really important for giving it stereo information, because if you look at this, everything here is one voice of unison. So there wasn't anything going on in the sides, and we kind of wanted that. We don't want it to be out of control because we want this to be mono compatible. But if we take a listen to our chorus here and crank up the mix a lot so you can hear what it's doing, I made sure to shift this a bit this way, so that way there's no lows in there, because you don't want stereo sub. Gives it that tone. If we just dial it back, you don't want to overdo it unless that's going to be a core thing of the sound. And then following that, I was just doing, again, dragging LFOs over to knobs on a flanger and a negative phaser. I thought this gave it a really cool tone. I had to take the mix down a bit because I was losing a lot of bass on the phaser thing. You see, I wanted it to work like this. That's where I wanted the sound to be. But because of the shape of this, I was just losing too much bass. And though there are ways to kind of pull that up with, like, say, a multiband compressor or something, it did sound a little odd. So I ended up just taking this back in the mix to sort of compromise because I didn't want to lose my sub there. But there are some ways you can go about handling that in a better way. Like, for example, you could divide up the sound with a frequency splitter and apply this only to things like above 150. That's probably how I would do it. But I thought that was a really cool sound, so I'm happy to get that. You could also mess with a phaser if you want. I left this one off here, but like, say you wanted this on, probably do something like this. That's cool. That's just sort of my mindset for making these bass sounds. Again, when you're making a bass, you could always do something like throw multiband compression on there, heavy OTT. In this instance, doesn't even need it because of the way it's designed, but that's something super useful for certain bass sounds. You can feel free to do that. But that's how I made this in Vital free synth. And now we're going to go into the post-processing because it is equally important. Again, without it, it sounds like this. But then with it, we have it sounding like this. You know, a lot louder, but also a lot more in control. So we do have some things to talk about with that. Alright, so now getting into the more sort of post-processing side of how we go about making these sounds. We are going to go to this portion of the track where we have our bass at its like fullest potential when all of the filters are basically off and it's just running how we want. So taking off our effects one at a time so we could kind of go through them. We're going to ignore those two at the bottom because those are the ones that are only in the intro. But if we take all of these off, and then we start here. The first thing we're adding is just cutting off a lot of high end above 10K. So if we solo that, this is what we're cutting off. I thought this was just nasty. The sound didn't need it, you see, versus this. If you do it back and forth like that, you might think, oh, that's missing high end, it needs it. But in the mix, it really doesn't. This is a very busy mix down. It's not even really fully mixed yet. It's kind of a mess still, to be honest. But that region is completely occupied by like our lead, the drum hits, like hats and stuff, for example. It just didn't need it. The second thing I have here is a massive single band compressor. This one is gain reduction. You could do this with any compressor though. You don't need to use this, but I love this plugin. Really just beefs it up. I love the tone of that, so I always throw it on sounds like this. One of the more important ones though is FabFilter Saturn 2. You could use really any saturation plugin you own, but in my instance there's a couple of things I'm doing here. So first off, I've made several different bands, as you can see. This verse one goes and covers basically all of the subnotes, so if we solo it, and what I'm doing there is clean tube saturation. This just made my sub a little more powerful. I liked it a lot. Then we took the region after the sub, but before like the bass is really existing in the mid, so just like a low mid section right here. And you see this normally sounds like this. I saturated this with warm tape quite a bit, removed quite a few dB of the actual sub bass from this, and just lowered it in volume a bit, so this was a little more tame. You want this to be very tame. Then we have our mids, which I'm just crushing with some warm tape. Some more upper mids that I reduced a bit of mid from, and again just crushed with warm tape. And then I'm basically doing the same thing as well, but reducing some more of that high end and doing warm tape saturation to that. So if we compare this one, you'll hear a pretty interesting difference. So with it off versus on. Just keeps it a lot more in line and controlled. I also threw a soothe on there after this to tame harsh resonant frequencies. You can see this is what it's taking out. You could really push a soothe, but I did it about as much as I felt comfortable with the sound. And then the last thing I'm doing, I am just clipping it pretty hard. You see, this is just going right into that limiter. And that was intentional because I wanted this to be super flat, take up a lot of space in our mix. And you could see that because when we do look at it, like with an oscilloscope here, for example, you see, it's pretty maxed out. And in this instance, I thought that was good. So that's what I do with post-processing, and again, this is something that like you just want to pay attention to because you could have a nice sound that you've designed yourself, but again, this needed some work. That's how it is without effects. That needed some work to fit into this mix the way I wanted it to. And then thankfully, you know, with those effects, it does. I hope this has given you like some insight into how I go about making some bass sounds. Bass sound design, I think, is some of the harder sound design you could do, and I still think I'm very much a beginner at that. I'm still learning quite a bit. So these are some techniques that I've found especially helpful so far, but again, a lot of it is just trial and error. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, but thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.